history has real political consequences today.
Right.
Like let's take China.
Mm-hmm.
Like people today think the Chinese are like the historical barbarians that are going to conquer the world. But that's just like a completely ignorant view of Chinese history.
It is.
Can you
Completely.
speak to that? Or?
Yeah, no, it's a completely ignorant view. It's something that like, you even saw in the beginning of the 20th century with like what they called at the time the Yellow Peril. They saw like straight up, it's insane. Like the Asian homies are brave. I'm laughing like, but it's true, dude. They called it the Yellow Peril, and it was this initial characterization of China. It came out of the Boxer Rebellion and stuff like that, of like these savage barbarians opposing Western rule, which is civilized and good and true and so but it's but it almost even tied into like that nomad framing. It's always that dialectic between the civilized, real civilization versus the barbarians.
Dehumanize.
Yeah, you dehumanize them in that way. It's true, and this is what the West did. Like we're liberal and democratic, or at least. If we don't have a democratic form of government, we have a liberal culture, and we have an advanced capitalist society, and so on. These barbarians are still peasants, truly. They're in feudalism of some sort. And they want to expand, and like the hordes of Asia want to tear down European civilization. It's this insane almost projection, because it's at a time when Asia's certainly not invading the West, and the West is invading Asia. It's like this insane projection, almost tied into those like barbaric characterizations of the nomads. So, this ignorance, like it has a propaganda political purpose. That's where it emerged originally. And it's very convenient. It's easy to say now, like almost the same framing. You see it with China, like, look at their barbaric communist society. They have children in the sweatshops and stuff like that. We don't do that. Yeah, we did, by the way, in the Industrial Revolution. We did that all the fucking time. Child labor was a big deal. They really had to ban it after like an extensive political effort. But it's like, you use that as the narrative now. They're barbaric because they have child labor. Look at the, like, insane, but most certainly propaganda, like the suicide nets. Like, they work their people so hard, these savage collectivist bugmen. They can't help it. They work their people so hard they have to jump out of the building and land in the net. They prevent them from killing themselves. It's like absurdities like you can't believe. But it's not grounded, of course, in a real historical understanding of China and Chinese civilization. Because if you did that, in the first place, it'd be more difficult to propagandize. You'd have to be mature about what Chinese civilization was and meet them with a certain intellectual parity, which you don't want to grant to this enemy you're trying to dominate. And that's part of the issue. But you also just get the true ignorance thing. Not only is it just like a deliberate, calculated propaganda effort, but there's certainly a whole host of politicians who are actually just stupid and ignorant. And they do just believe this about China prima facie. Like they do just accept that as the reality. No, China is like this. They don't see it for propaganda, and they're not acquainted with the history in any way to even be able to identify the propaganda at all or contrast it with the historical reality. So, pretty bad. But that historical ignorance then, whether it's deliberate propaganda or true ignorance, does inform our foreign policy, our politics itself. We're operating on some sort of presupposition about what China is, and you can even then justify, either out of ignorance or propaganda, this moral crusade against it. Like, our civilization has to triumph over theirs because it's inherently better or superior, it's more moral or it's good. And they're like, okay, so going to war with them is a good thing. We can justify their conquest then. That's a terrible political reality.
Is it true that historically China has not been a conquering civilization?
Essentially, yes. They really haven't. As outside of their core territory, and in certain dynasties, you saw some expansion. Like the Tang dynasty was one, the Qing dynasty was another. There was some expansion. But outside of even those expansionary zones, which encompass parts of like Central Asia and Tibet, they never really waged wars of conquest outside of that. China is very much characterized by their sort of inward focus. Very atypically, you could say, compared to other civilizations. So, again, if you have this historical understanding of how China has operated in the past for millennia, the idea that suddenly they're an expansionist, warlike civilization is absurd, just on the face of it. It's even more absurd in the context of like the Yellow Peril in the early 20th century of the Qing dynasty. Like, they're not going to expand, they're not attacking Qing. The idea that they're in this like warpath to invade the West is ridiculous. And you'd say, oh, maybe after the communist times, they're more expansionary. It's like, no, they haven't been. And obviously, you can see what characterizes Chinese rule now, and it's not necessarily grounded in pure Marxist principles, you know? It's diverged quite a bit. It actually approximates what Chinese rule was historically. But you have to fucking know the history to say that in the first place, and that's the point. They're not going to expand.
Besides this retarded conception of China by like our modern day Western politicians, where else are there examples of like this complete ignorance of history leading to foreign policy errors?
The easiest example that's been pointed out a bunch is just our wars in the Middle East. Like, we had the most, to say it's retarded is understating the case. Like, our approach to the Middle East is ridiculous, dude. Like, you can't fathom it. And if you're even slightly acquainted with Middle Eastern history, you could identify through 20 years of war in Iraq and Afghanistan so many different instances of missteps that could have been easily avoided, just with like a basic understanding. Like, recently even our Secretary of State, like Rubio, he was saying in relation to Hamas that they are anticipating the reign of the Mahdi, who's going to come in and destroy the Christians and whatnot. It's like, first of all, only the Shia believe in the Mahdi in this way, and the Hamas are not Shia. Like, it's just a theological error. The second place, the other theological error, the Shia who do believe in the Mahdi who's going to come at the end times, he's not going to massacre Christians or anything else like that, Christians and Jews. That's not even part of the Shia theology. Like, there's like 2 layers of just basic theological error that you can correct on Wikipedia in like a Google search. You know what I mean? Like, it takes 2 seconds.
Are they truly errors, though?
Yeah, very much so. Like, they're wrong. He mischaracterized this group and their beliefs. Like, absolutely.
But I was.
Mm-hmm.
Is he being purposeful?
Oh yeah, I know what you mean. Like, is it deliberate? Like, we can go into the same sort of propaganda. It's like a Yellow Peril type thing. Yeah, that's a good question, honestly, in very much the case. But the idea that you could just impose democracy, for instance, in the broader sense, like the war of Iraq, it's just not going to happen. It's a misunderstanding of the history of the period, that exact culture. What would they be even amenable to in their culture politically? Impossible.
And it's like this ignorance of history by the broader population allows these politicians to then exploit that ignorance. Because
Right.
if Rubio says Hamas wants to,
Yeah.
you know, slaughter all the Christians by reinstating whatever,
Right.
like, they don't know enough to check him.
Well, they can't check him on it. It's a good point. The ignorance is like twofold in that case. Like, it just compounds. It's like a pinball machine. It just bounces off of itself until it hits the end point. Like, that's all you got. Because Rubio can say the most stupid shit you've ever heard if you're familiar with the topic, and there's quite literally nobody in the populace who's going to challenge it. They just accept it full on. You'll see it on Fox News when it's reported that night, and then you'll hear your boomer grandpa repeating that. You're just like, your boomer grandpa like is the population in that sense. Like, it's a huge swath of voters, you know. So they get into like almost a panic, like, oh, we have to defeat Hamas now because they're going to bring in we have
They're
to
going to destroy our Western civilization.
right, and it's just it's pernicious.
Right. The major thing is death Israel, death America, right?
Yeah, they're coming for America. Like, Israel's
They're
this
coming
bulwark. Israel's the
They're coming for
bulwark.
like 3-bedroom house in like Glendale.
The main target right there. And that was one of the funniest things, talking about that ignorance, because it ties into it. That was the whole like explanation for 9/11. They just hate our way of life. Like, Muslims just hate freedom, you know. Like, they do just want to attack the 3-bedroom house in Glendale because it represents some sort of American ideal that they're just inherently opposed to. It's like not the case at all. It's not even remotely. They don't give a fuck about what we're doing over here in principle, you know.
What would like a historically informed approach to the Middle East look like?
It's a good question. Like, absolutely. In the first place, you'd disabuse yourself of any notion that you could sort of implement an American Western style of governance or culture in the Middle East.
Sort of like how you treat Asia?
Yeah. You'd have to meet them on their own terms in the first place. If you were getting rid of a single political leader, like Saddam Hussein, for instance, you wouldn't try to do the nation-building democratic process after that. You would elevate another Muslim leader who would be willing to cooperate better with our interests, the United States, whatever it might be. You probably wouldn't even get involved in the first place if you really had the foresight. You would see Saddam as sort of like a linchpin that's sort of keeping together a fragile situation in the region anyways. Like, he was a strongman secular dictator who was capable of sort of, through power, bridging the gap or unifying the disparate religious elements that were in conflict within Iraq, like the Shias and Sunnis who did have issues with each other, and also the tribal ethnic conflicts that existed between the Kurds and the Iraqis and so on and so forth. You probably just wouldn't even get rid of him in the first place, because if you had some knowledge of post-Ottoman Middle Eastern politics, you'd realize that if you get a strong man who rises to the top, that's pretty lucky given the circumstance. Like, you kind of want him. You want a Gaddafi or a Saddam. Like, they're going to be able to maintain order in a way that's not easily replaceable. When you get rid of them, it's just fucked, you know? Like, so you probably wouldn't even do it in the first place, but saying you did, you'd still have to operate on those terms and pretty much put another strong man in there who was capable of wielding that power and was also just Muslim and Islamic and was ruling an Islamic way, more or less. At least you wouldn't be pushing women's rights, for instance, like they did in Afghanistan. So you wouldn't be trying to do these like cultural programs to try and shift or morph the culture of the Middle East. That's just going to create hostility from the population, which it did. Like in Afghanistan, there's a hilarious example. NATO was there. They were building wells for like the women in the Afghani villages because in that culture, it was the providence of the males to have access to the water and distribute it to the village, to the family. Like, the males had water rights. And NATO built a bunch of like female-only wells like in the villages and like enforced it with like, you know, with guards and everybody else. Like, you know, you have to, because this is part of this feminist effort, really.
That just sounds retarded.
No, it is.
About this, I'm imagining.
We spent millions of dollars on this, you know what I mean?
That's
Like,
retarded.
yeah.
This is retarded.
It'll never work.
I don't know.
Because their view, of course, came from the Western perspective that every woman is a secret feminist who really wants to be liberated, and the women there are naturally oppressed. And if they just have access to their own water wells, it'll be the first step in them breaking up the patriarchal power in their tribal village. But there's a problem for these wells. At night, when the guards were off duty or whatnot, people were sneaking in, breaking them, destroying them across all these villages in Afghanistan. Of course, we do a full like NATO investigation and all this shit. Like, who's actually breaking the wells? And time again, in every single village, they found it was the women who went out and broke the wells. Because they saw it as an insult that this foreign government was coming in and trying to disabuse their men of their power. They saw it as an unbelievable intrusion in their way of life. That this fucking like random like girl boss in NATO who's giving a PowerPoint about the importance of their female-only wells was come in and tell their men, their husbands, their fathers that they didn't have the rights to their own village, the rights to their own culture, their own power, which they willingly wanted to submit to and acquiesce to. It was the fucking women breaking the wells every single time.
What did the Roman Empire think of like Chinese civilization? Did they have a more informed view, or was it?
The Romans didn't know too much about China. They actually had an ambassadorial contact at one point. Like, so they did exchange ambassadors, but they didn't know too much about the civilization in its particulars. But what's interesting is they did respect it. They saw it as a civilizational equal. They knew, at the very least, that China was a very powerful state somewhere in the Far East. And the Han Dynasty, which is in power in China at the time when these embassies occurred, they had a similar view of Rome. They didn't know too much about it in its particulars, but knew there was some sort of powerful state in the West. The Han had an interesting term. They actually called Rome, and it's like a loose translation, they called Rome at the time the other China. Like that's what they call it. Like, yeah.
Dude, that's so
Yeah, it's,
hard.
yeah, it is.
Our other equal.
Yeah, right,
Dude,
it's
that
this
is
other
so
equal.
sick.
And for them, it tied into this like cosmological point of view. Like just as there's a real, and they saw themselves as the true like middle kingdom. They're the real center. But just as like it's deployed in the world, there's a China of the East. There must also be like a balance and a harmony like in the West. There's a China of the West too. Like almost like a yin and yang type thing, you know. So
That is really interesting.
yeah, it's really interesting. So they saw each other as equal, and on a broader sense too, like the Romans, for instance, when they conquered barbarians, they still understood them as particularized barbarians, and they didn't think that they could necessarily impose Roman civilization on them with anything but force. You know, like it would have to be force, and it'd be a difficult road. But regardless, they could never truly become Roman in the thorough sense. It's not till way later, at the end of the empire, you see this extension of citizenship to everybody in the empire, and it was already seen as a controversial like concession, like this is bad idea and doesn't represent the actual reality. What's interesting too, a good example to show the distinctions, the original liberals of the Enlightenment, they did not view liberalism as like the universal neutral human civilization. They actually had the opposite view. They viewed liberalism as something that could only emerge in the particular historical context of Western civilization. John Stuart Mill is one of the great liberal thinkers. He quite literally says in his writing, liberalism only works for white Europeans. And all of the other, what he calls savage races, must be ruled by despotism. Like, they can't have any liberalism whatsoever. They have to be ruled by despots, by autocratic rulers, kings, emperors, dictators, whoever it might be. He did not see liberalism as just like the universal model for humanity that you could impose at will. So that's the interesting part too. That conception is very much 20th century. Maybe early 19th century, late 19th century, you see the early emergence of that tendency, like the white man's burden, you got to kind of bring them up into this. Maybe it's possible. Yeah.
It still hasn't changed much.
Right. But then the idea that it's just the default civilization is fairly modern.
I wonder if we could, in our modern time, kind of go back to like the two Chinas or the two Romes.
Yeah.
Now you see the rise of China as like an equal to the American empire.
Right.
And it's like, would an informed American foreign policy go back to like this mutual respect?
We're
Like,
doing
what
the
would that look
opposite.
like?
Yeah, we're doing the opposite now. But I think we're doing the opposite because really the system, the powers that be, operate under that liberal paradigm. And by this, I mean the modern liberal taught paradigm, which sees liberal civilization as universal, default, and neutral. And so under that paradigm, a civilization like China cannot exist in power as an equal. It must be stopped because it is wrong. It's deviated from the true ideal civilization, the true human type, you could say. You mentioned something as a good qualifier, a key word there, but an informed foreign policy. Could it treat China as an equal? I'd say yes, but this informed foreign policy must kind of come from this post-liberal view, or this non-liberal view, which will necessarily emanate from the right. It has to sort of remove this conception that liberalism, liberal modernity, represents the end point or the final default neutral universal human civilization. And you can have alternative types of advanced societies that are equal or even superior in some ways to Western society. And you have to meet them on those terms. That's the only framing you can even approach China. So much of the dissonance does come from this universalized liberal understanding that there can really only be liberalism and nothing else.
What would that look like today? Because now the world is so small.
Yeah.
You go back to the Roman Empire, they didn't have to think about China much.
Right.
But now the world is so connected. So what would that look like today? Like these two big civilizations operating with mutual respect.
I think, and this is like a bold claim I haven't thought through altogether, but I think it would come from political separation but economic harmony. There would be different political eventualities for each civilizational type. United States, China. They'd rule in accordance to different principles, in accordance to different values and so on, but they would have integrated economies that keep them unified. So they have their own immediate economic sphere, And that's where the political sort of body exercises its power and sovereignty, but yet this economic sphere extends beyond itself into the other's domain as well. And as the two are economically unified, because it'd be impossible to do something otherwise, that's where you just truly have a polarized world order, conflict, a freezing of relations, and so on. They need to be harmonized economically in a way that's mutually beneficial and serves the political interests of both class and both powers. I think if there's an economic unity, whether it's through trade, deeper integration on both sides of manufacturing and certain services, whatever it might be, it needs to sort of serve both political interests in a way, and that's probably the only way to avoid the true conflict. If you have separate, divergent economic interests, it'll just lead to political distance too. I think you could have two political principles ruling in accordance to the same economic reality, if that makes sense. We've kind of mentioned this before, but like it would come from like a harmony in business in a certain way. Like we have the certain services that they want, but they have like, for instance, the infrastructure building capacity that we don't have. Like we would just bring over something like their infrastructure builders, pay them to build our cities, fix our infrastructure, whatever it might be. In exchange, we get business expansion for our services in China or something like that, whether it's Amazon or who knows, you get some fucking, the particulars are a different question in a certain sense. But like, I think you can envision this type of integration where the idea of real political conflict becomes impossible. It's because you can't rely, as James's original question indicated, on just the distance. Like the world's smaller than ever because of the technology. Everything's explored, everything's in contact. You can't just say, oh, I'm Rome and there is some big powerful empire in the East, but I'm never going to have to interact with them. Like you're going to have to interact with them now. It's inevitable. The best way to sort of normalize the interaction, smooth it over and integrate it is through the economy. And it's the only way to maintain the different political principles too, which I think are more natural and emergent from the societies, the cultures that they come from. The economy is the economy. It's abstract. It can happen anywhere in a certain sense, and it can be integrated anywhere. It can be developed anywhere. That's why everybody's struggling to develop them. The politics is different.
Separately, kind of going to European affairs in Russia. I understand the purpose of NATO when it was to counter communist Russia and communist expansion as the threat. Even that, might have been overzealous, some would argue. But why is there today such a fear of like Russian imperialism from Western Europe?
Right.
And like, why is there this need for regime change in Russia and regime change in China? I don't know if you want to speak to any of that with the Russian question.
The Russian question's hard. I don't know if I have a totally good answer for it too. Like, my initial impression too is, and it's a kind of trite, facile point, but like these countries, it gives Europe a sense of civilizational purpose too. If they feel like they have some sort of united front, it's a perfect dialectic. Like you could say, we're Western Europe, we represent this liberalism again, like against this autocratic Russia, which has transgressed against these principles, And this, because they've transgressed against these principles, they represent an existential threat to our order. This is why I think you even see this in the rhetoric too. Like it does connect to this question. There's a lot of rhetoric surrounding Ukraine, like, oh, it's a democracy still. Like it's a democracy, even though it's probably not just as much a democracy as Russia is, in any meaningful sense. But they want to frame it in those terms. This is a democratic state, smaller, a sort of underdog that's going against the big, bad, autocratic Putin. And this is a threat to sort of the European way. I also think it's a way for the Europeans. This is just totally my personal impression, but I think they have in many ways an inferiority complex in relation to the United States as well. And it's a way for them on the whole to assert themselves militarily and say, if we're involved actively in this conflict, we're funding it, we want to get, this is why like France has postures that they're going to put troops on the ground or something like that in Ukraine and fight Russia. The UK's postured like this before, which would be insane, it'd be disastrous. But part of it is like, we're not just the empty vassal states of the United States. We have some sort of civilizational political identity that we can back up with force. And If you say Putin's not really a threat, I don't actually think they believe he's going to expand all the way into Western Europe or something like that. But it's the perfect pretense to justify a military buildup, a civilizational purpose, some sort of societal orientation that you wouldn't have otherwise, sort of in the absence of an enemy. It's kind of a trite general answer, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's at least a factor in their thinking, you know. Maybe there's deeper stuff going on. I'd almost like ask you in that way, because I don't know. But I see it in those terms, like Putin has transgressed against that like liberal order that the Western Europeans represent.
Is there a way for Europe to rise again and enter history again? Beyond just cringe, let's combat the autocrat in Russia?
No. No. I just don't think they can. I think
It's cooked, bro.
the sun is set in Europe, basically. Like, it's kind of done. And it's, you know,
It's pretty sad.
it's here. It's starting to set in the United States as well. Like, you know, I always think of the United States as like the far west. Just like you always talk about the far east. You have the east and the far east. Like, the United States has always been the far west. We take a lot of Western tendencies as they've existed historically to their excess. We've always typified them. We've always had this sort of brash American boldness that you just didn't see in Europe. I think there was a real sundown on their civilization, and everything that was sort of Western, true, and vivified and lively is now sort of in the United States. Europe will exist insofar as it limps along with us. I just don't see I don't see a way for them out of this historical moment. They're never going to have a dictator again or something like that. Like, their whole it's all in opposition to this. And who else outside of a strongman is going to be able to revitalize their civilization? You know, they're caught in this like the most empty, soul-gnawing bureaucracy you could possibly imagine. It's like that's what their society seems like. It's just hollow, empty, no purpose.
So the Save Europe movement is
I
not
think
strong enough?
it's cooked. It's dead in the water, you know. But in a real meta-historical sense, no, I just don't see the moment. Maybe anything can happen in that way with history, but I just don't see any eventuality now that's conceivable.
Is it a way that like Europe just seems like tourism in Africa?
Yeah. That's the thing, like the demographics are going to change. Like, it's just an inevitable reality. Like, give it 50, 60 years, how many Europeans are really left, in a sense, you know?
Zero. It's all,
Yeah,
all
it's just-
foreigners.
It's kind of dark to say, but we're talking about a different Europe already in its texture, its culture, its values, whatever it might be, however way you don't conceive of it. It's going to be different no matter what.
It seems like it's just an open air museum
Yeah.
with restaurants.
Yeah.
An obscure historical question, but
Mm-hmm.
can you talk about restaurants and
Oh,
how it's actually a historical anomaly and a very new thing that never existed in human history up until only maybe 200 years ago?
Yeah, roughly. Like, even less, honestly. Like, I wouldn't say you start getting like true restaurants, that restaurant experience, until maybe 100 years ago or so. Like, it's a turn of the century type of experience. I don't know too much about it, honestly. Like, I won't pretend to be an expert, but it outside of like your regular domicile or whatever like palace complex you were connected to throughout history, no matter what civilization you had, the only sort of approximate restaurant experience you'd have is like an inn or a tavern or something like that. And it's not like a restaurant. Like, you're going there to spend the night because you're traveling or something. It was mostly booze oriented like half the time. Like, the idea of like the restaurant, like, it comes out of this like the imperial period of Europe. You have the access to food in greater abundance because of industrial farming techniques. There's also this exoticism because of all the territories that Europe has conquered and incorporated. You can try different foods, different cuisines, different experimental techniques, and you're moving out of a pure manufacturing economy into a sort of early service economy too, where you have entrepreneurship. Buy a spot, open a restaurant, you serve this food that you can continually buy and access, like as a business in this service capacity. Like, I guess you needed the right, like, sort of economic and historical confluences to even be present in the first place, to have something like the restaurant experience where you could just go out, sit down in some place and buy food from anywhere in the world, like, or at least cooked in that style, you know, and you're just paying for the food. You have this waiter who comes and treats you like a lord, you know. It was all, honestly, that aspect does tie into, like, the new money sort of American idea too. Like, we get the butler, we get the
Abundance,
service,
yeah.
we have the abundance. Like, just because we have money and we could go and sit down at this restaurant, we have some guy who's going to come and, like, be servile towards us. That's something,
Literally be like
yeah.
a servant.
something only the aristocracy had in the past, for instance. But now you just have the money. So, like it's just kind of funny to say. I don't know how to phrase it properly, but something like a restaurant, like you just go and show up to, is like impossible to imagine, like in medieval Europe, for instance. Like, it's so dissonant with that civilization and all of its other institutions that it just doesn't even make sense to think about. Like, you wouldn't have it in the same way. It's weird. You couldn't imagine it.